What do you find so compelling about the book, from your perspective?
I think the one thing that I feel I learned from that book that I hadn't really thought about before, well, first of all, just let me say that when I first started the book and I handed in the first part of it to Jason Epstein, the first part after Mao's death, which was sort of a description of life in Zhongnanhai, he said, "This doesn't work, think power." And so immediately I thought, okay, Mao is the emperor. That's who he is. He's living in Zhongnanhai. He's living in Qianlong's compound, right?
Right.
And once I realized that Mao was the emperor, whatever his ideology, I sort of understood Mao, and everything else about Mao made sense. So to me, then the next question is, but what about Li Zhisui? How do you accept this for so long? Because I think you can't survive next to a dictator for so many years without violating your own personal ethics. So I think that was something that was troubling, but understandable. And I think, so I finally concluded that Mao wouldn't have been possible without the political culture surrounding him. You know, people really did adulate Mao. That wasn't false. That wasn't fake. So it's very hard to understand that political culture. Now, Chinese have also pointed out to me, well, if one part of the political culture is that we all adulated Mao, what do we do about 1989? What about when we all took to the streets in protest?
Right.
And yeah, the answer is it's very complicated, and there's on the one hand and on the other hand. Well, the one thing I will say is that, and it's in the book, I think, this 1989 happened before the book was published. And Li Zhisui said very clearly in the book that if he had been in China at the time, he would have gone right along with the criticisms against the students, and he would have taken the side of
the students' protest,
whether he believed it or not.
Right. So to clarify one issue, so you started working on the book in 1990.
I think it was 1991.
1991. So that was right after the students' protest movement in 1989.
Right. I was in China in 1989, and I stayed in China for a year after that, and then came back, and I think I spent a year in New York, and then I moved to Washington, D.C.
Right. So, but I have heard that when Dr. Li Zhisui first conceptualized the book, and he wanted this book to be a personal memoir. The focus of the book is a personal memoir, and then in the end, we read it, it's more like the private life of Chairman Mao, and then the subheading is his personal memoir. How did you, during the process, right, how did you reconcile these two?
I didn't have to reconcile it. I didn't have to reconcile it, because when the book came to me, it was the private life of Chairman Mao.
Oh.
So that I didn't have to reconcile that. So to me, actually, the surprise was that I was learning so much about Li Zhisui, writing The Private Life of Chairman Mao. And it was also very much a book about him, definitely a book about him.
So when you co-authored the book or collaborated with him, you had that in mind. It was a personal journey. It was his story, rather than was a story of Mao.
But the book, but the first manuscript, whatever title it was, to me the title was The Private Life of Chairman Mao.
Oh, I see.
So I started with that. So I was more surprised about learning so much about Li Zhisui than I was about The Private Life of Chairman Mao. Right? So,
that's great. And you mentioned about professional ethics. I know that after the book came out, there's been a lot of criticism saying that as Mao's personal physician, there was the patient and the physician confidentiality issue. And now he just publicized this whole thing about Mao. What do you think of that?
I think that those are good criticisms. I mean, it's true. It was a violation of the ethic between a doctor and his patient. But this patient was Mao Zedong, who was the leader of 3 billion people, who had, I think, led China in many very, very wrong directions. He was a very, very, not just a public figure in China, but he was a worldwide figure. And Yeah, he may have violated those ethics, but in the, is there, I don't know that I could argue this, but you could argue that there was a higher ethic involved, which is to reveal the reality of a dictatorship.
I guess somebody, because he's such a public figure, it was in the public interest
Yeah,
to know
yeah.
about something like that, I guess.
Yeah.
But
And I have to say that many Chinese have come up to me and said, I completely changed their mind about Mao. Not I personally, but that book completely changed their mind about Mao. They had worshipped him until they read that. And of course, some of them still want to know, was it really true?
that's what some part of my questions,
Yeah.
it seems like. Go ahead.
I think it was true. Well, my personal view is that's as close to Chairman Mao as we will ever get. And I'm sure that there are mistakes of fact in the book in terms of when things happened, where they happened, who met whom when. But I think that the underlying truth of that book is real.
That's true. I think that when I first read the book, 1995, and soon after the book came out, that was the question I raised: is how much was true? To me, it's like there were certain anecdotes about Mao didn't want to brush his teeth, and he compared his teeth to those of the tiger, saying why the tigers they never brush the teeth, but they're so sharp. I said, how?
But that's hard to make up, right?
No, that's what I figured. One of the key issues that with me was he said that he used to keep a journal every day.
Yes.
And then in the 1970s,
Right.
and then the head of the secretary or somebody told him it was very dangerous or something. He burned all the journals.
Right.
So that my first question was when I read the book is how credible
Right.
his stories were. How sometimes our memories are not
That's right.
completely
That's
reliable.
That's right.
So did you run into the same issue?
Yes. So, yes, absolutely. The first thing to be said about Li Zhisui is that he really did have a very good memory. And I think there's a reason for his memory, and that is because every day when he met Mao, Mao said, "Is there any news?" And he was asking the same question of everybody else on his staff. And so everybody had to report the news to Mao accurately, because otherwise you get in real trouble. You get kicked from the circle. So your mind gets trained to sort of remember in a way that you and I think, don't have to remember day to day. But I also think that however good your memory is, it's fallible. And I think his memory was fallible. I had at the same time a research assistant working with all of the checking as much as could be checked against published facts about Mao. So we've had, first of all, the party history, so you can check lots of dates and places through
Right.
that. But then there are press reports. So there were times when we often found discrepancy between one person's story and Li Zhisui's story. And I would often ask him about those discrepancies, and sometimes he would say, "Oh, yes, that's right. It was such and such a time, or it was such and such a person." And other times he would say, "No, I'm going to stick by the way I see it." So it is his personal view. I think the underlying truth, the underlying story is absolutely fundamentally true, but I would certainly concede that there are certainly going to be some errors of fact, place, date, person in some parts of it.